how do you see AI impacting this or catapulting it? Where do you see it going in the next 5, 10 years?
Wow, it's amazing where the technology is today. And we're just getting started, right? From an industry standpoint, you think about this notion of AI today, where it's a lot of, chatbots, if you would, where they're using, ChatGPT or using Gemini, depending on what large language model that's out there. And it's sort of these spikes, right? Like you do a query and it gives you something back. The world and the technology world is moving to this world of agentic in terms of having agents. Think about us, our digital workers, or an agent for the space that I'm sitting in, the place that I'm sitting in, the operations elements that are going to be a bunch of digital agents.
Hello and welcome back to a new year of the Smarter Building podcast. Today I'm joined by Bob Cicero from Cisco, who focuses on the hybrid work and sustainable real estate projects within Cisco. So welcome, Bob. It's great to have you, and we're really excited to hear about how you're defining strategy to deliver intelligent, sustainable workplaces through connected infrastructure or smart buildings, which is a perfect topic for the Smarter Building podcast. So, Bob, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background at Cisco?
Sure. So first of all, thank you for having me today and kick off the new year here in 2026. So I've been at Cisco for 25 years and started in 1999. When you can think back that long, maybe some of the listeners won't even be that old to think that back that far, but it was really around how do we get digital plumbing effectively across the world, right? When you think about the build of the internet. I always found myself at sort of the intersection of technology transitions or industry transitions in terms of industries that were going to get disrupted. And it's just interesting today when you think about in 2026 with AI, every industry is going to be disrupted. And so when you think about the built environment, I spent a lot of time in our sports and entertainment world in terms of building net new stadiums across the globe. When we thought about what was going to impact the fan experience and delivering all the capabilities that you think about in your pocket today. And when we started that body of work, it didn't exist. But we also looked at the real estate world and we saw this opportunity from the early days, when I'm saying early days, around about 18 years ago, in terms of really looking at, you think about real estate and the length of the asset, technology was often an afterthought. And we saw multiple sort of building systems coming in place that were all disparate from a network standpoint. We thought we could move them together. And as time moved on, it was just not about single converged infrastructure, but it was around sharing data. And now what are we going to look at from the standpoint of all the capabilities around us in terms of really what we're trying to do is amplify the intersection of people and space. So I now lead our future-proof workplace business at Cisco in the Americas. And what that really means is that how do we really think about a technology platform that just not applies to the IT side of the house, but thinking about the OT, the real estate side of the house, to really, as I mentioned, amplify that intersection of people and space, centered around just not this notion of great work experience, but how do you think about sustainability, how do you think about wellness, and ultimately it's really data as a differentiator. I mean, you think about in terms of the conversation today, I'm sure we'll talk about AI inside of this.
The great backdrop you have there. So I think you said you're based in your New York office today. So based on your experience at Cisco, is there anything exciting you can share with us about how that technology has maybe influenced where you're sitting today?
I am in New York. I am sitting in Penn Plaza in Penn 1, right actually east of Hudson Yards. A lot of folks probably know as a massive redevelopment project here in the city. And so, as I mentioned before, this notion of converged building infrastructure in terms of moving all systems to one infrastructure to not just get economies of scale, but share data. We thought prior to the pandemic is that we looked at workspace and we said, there's an opportunity to really reshape this notion of thinking about OT separate from the IT world. And a lot of times when you think about IT, you think about connectivity, you think about how do I get Wi-Fi? You think about, from the standpoint of collaboration components. As a technology developer for the world, we were looking at how do you actually embed intelligence into everything that we do. And if we looked around the globe right now, currently, we have about 16 million square feet around the globe. And we looked at it and we said, we have snowflakes everywhere. Everything is unique and different. Yes, architecturally, it's different, of course, based on the city or location that you're in. but all the technology components, the only thing that was similar was IT, right? IT, we think about platform all day long, right? So if I think about Cisco and really in our DNA, we think about platform and this notion of providing a platform around the IT world. Well, we looked at the real estate side of the house and we saw all these disparate solutions getting put in place. And sometimes they were tried and they failed. And, we'd have to care and feed for these for, 10, 15, 20 years, depending on life of asset, life of lease, et cetera. And so for us, this project that I'm sitting in right now became sort of this notion of, can we really build a platform that not only stratifies IT use cases, but all the OT elements as well? And so we actually started this in 2019, December. Fast forward, the pandemic hit in 2020, obviously in March, but that was actually an opportunity for us to really rethink everything. And so when we think about this notion of platform, we think about four main elements to it. The first is that this notion of work has forever changed, obviously post-pandemic. Video and the capabilities for us to do this today, that's just standard practice. Before that was sort of, you think about space was 10% of spaces where people you could actually do that in. Now that's how we operate. But yet, when you think about the architecture and design world, they were taught about physical space. And this notion of bringing physical and virtual together was very foreign from a concept perspective in terms of really thinking about what the virtual participants are going to see. So this project launched this notion of how do we really get a phenomenal mixed presence experience, also coupled with a great in-person experience. The second thing we want to look at was from a sustainability standpoint. And a lot of folks talk about sustainability and talk about energy utilization. Of course, we want to look at both sides. We want to figure out, is there a way we can look at embodied carbon plus operational carbon and really reshape the way we think about energy? And so if we think back when we were starting this in 2020, AI data centers didn't exist, but we all see this massive need now for energy. And so when we think about this energy component, we said, we're going to take everything we possibly can, move it to a global standard. And that global standard happens to be Power Ethernet, right? And when we look at that, we're a technology company. It's a global standard that no matter where we are in the globe, can we re-platform? Can we take every single built environment component that's sub 90 watts? Can we move lights? Can we move shades? Can we move the AV controllers? Can we move desking, desk charging on workstations, et cetera? Can we move that to the network? And we did move this to the network just not for power, but also now you could control everything. So real proof point is in this location, we took about 3,000 pounds of steel out of the ceiling in the form of pipe and conduit. We took 1,000 pounds of copper out. And again, that's on the embodied side. 36% of our energy came out of this location. Since I've been at the company 25 years, we've always been in this building. So we had an energy comp from before and after. 36% was removed. And so we were able to do that because now we moved everything over to a new energy source that's globally significant. So the same thing we did here, we moved to London, Paris, Milan, right, in the overseas and, North Sydney, Tokyo. And so sustainability is sort of that second key lever for us. The third was around wellness. And so when you think about wellness inside the workplace, we think about the WELL standard a lot, but how do we maximize natural daylight? How do we think about thermal comfort for our employees? But how do we look at that just not from the capabilities that Cisco is providing, but our ecosystem is providing as well? So how do we partner with roller shade manufacturers that build a platform that moves shades up and down all day long, right? So I am sitting, this is due east behind me, the Empire State Building is behind me. So it's sort of a nice day here in New York, but these will go up and down all day long, right? So this notion of wellness, and we're embedding all these capabilities into everything that we do. So the device that I'm controlling this endpoint with that's inside this room, we have sensors in there. And it's just not us, but we also looked at this notion of that ecosystem. So for example, for us, we're partnering with the leaders in the world that one of the biggest feedback elements that we had from our customers in the past is that we just want things to be able to be plugged in and work together, not have to put custom software on top of it, not have to do any of these components. And that's really this goal of this ecosystem element. And the fourth goal for us was really thinking about data. And we have data everywhere around us. So we think about this notion of just pure occupancy. If we think about surveillance cameras differently and add some intelligence into them, they count people, right, in and out of a space. Everyone is connected when you walk into any sort of space. Wireless is a great source of data about people. The capabilities we've added in terms of our video conferencing collaboration devices, where NVIDIA chipsets are behind everything we do. we're counting people inside the room. And there's that desk level technology. So it's not specific sensors. It's all this notion of data. And so when we launched where I'm sitting right now in 2022, we're turning up on 4 years here, is we collected 5,000 data points up out of this location. And everyone said, why do you need all that data? We like to think that we invent the future. And so when you think back in 2022, again, this notion of AI was out there, but it didn't hit the mainstream. Now you see without data, you cannot have phenomenal AI language models, right? Whether they're large language models, small language models, you have to have the data to be able to instantiate that. And then also ultimately where we think about getting to is this world of agentic. So those 4 components really around this mixed presence plus sustainability plus wellness plus data and this notion of digitizing our real estate, those provided this foundational principles for us to think about a platform that we proved it here where I'm sitting. We took it to Atlanta. We took it to Austin, Texas. We took it to Washington, D.C. We took it to Milan. We took it to Paris. We took it to London. This is our global platform. And this message is resonating with our clients in terms of thinking about everything across their portfolio in terms of having it be not only the same on the IT side of the house, but on the OT built environment side.
Hmm. So that was going to actually be my next question. So obviously this is being proven to work very well for Cisco, but how is it sort of resonating with some of your clients? Are there any notable projects that you can give any examples of where they're also adopting this sort of method?
There are, and every customer is on their own journey. And some folks are in the mode of compression because of this notion of distributed work that's occurring. Others are in a growth mode, right? Depending on the industry that they're in, the company that they're in. And so what we try to do is intersect our clients in terms of them really looking at where they are from a portfolio standpoint, what they need to do from a real estate point of view. And as technologists, we need to not think about the next year. We're thinking about the next decade. And so when we look at that in that intersection, we really want to look at what technology components that customers already have from us. What capabilities can we provide them from the standpoint of the data that they already have? They might have our video endpoints, et cetera, our wireless. That's a great source of data to really start making really impactful, not only planning changes, but also operational changes. So just to think about some customers is like, there's a great case study we put out around TripAdvisor. And TripAdvisor was really going through, it's obviously a very global brand. I'm sure everyone uses it. Never fails me. It's a fantastic platform. But this notion of space and compression. So post-pandemic, they cut 50% of their footprint globally. And so when they cut 50% of that footprint, they put in way more technology than they ever did before because they had to cater to this mixed presence world. They also needed to think about sustainability and the experience components. So, from a TripAdvisor perspective is that they put all the technology components together, yes, on IT, but then moved it over to the real estate side where they're actually taking people count inside of a conference room and changing the temperature, right? And changing that from the standpoint of using data that you already have, driving something actionable around the wellness pillar, if you would. As one example, they're doing wayfinding. So you walk into all their spaces, have a digital map in terms of actually what's happening in real time. Platform that we call Cisco Spaces, but that notion of platform that shows what's happening in real time. The data is coming from the IT stack and not a specific built sensor stack to give their employees this notion of what's actually happening. And I can literally take a QR code, take a image of with my phone in my pocket and have wayfinding capabilities, all delivered across this from a seamless standpoint. And it's a globally significant implementation for them. So it's a great use case of in looking about this notion of platform across all their locations, and their density of technology went way up, but yet the amount of square footage they cut in half. Another customer, when we think about this notion of really re-electrifying the components that are in the built environment, and I talked about us moving everything low voltage or power over Ethernet. We have a hospital, actually in the Midwest here in the U.S., Clark County Hospital, that everything that touches the patient is actually been moved over to the network. And so the network is not only providing the power, but it's obviously providing control as well, because that's the fundamental structure of a network. And that's their go forward strategy. And so these capabilities, and what I get excited about is this notion of, customers like TripAdvisor adopting the platform approach, but then critical infrastructure elements. You think about patient care, there's probably nothing more critical. And the network is in the middle of all that. And this notion of re-electrification is occurring. And oh, by the way, right, you get shocked with Power Ethernet. It's literally a single connection that you plug in, like you plug your computer in if you weren't wireless, that is now for the built environment. And that technology is now percolating and being spread out in terms of AV and AV over IP. And the world is, going to be adopting that at scale across the board.
I was actually going to bring up hospitals because in the UK especially, we're seeing that they're a bit slower on the adoption of digital data, etc. I don't know if it is the same in the US. So it just intrigued me, what for a hospital to become fully digitized and ensure the wellness of patients and etc. What do they kind of need to start with? What is the data points they need to have in place in order to build this hospital of the future?
In the healthcare space, we really, obviously healthcare has been conservative, right? Because of the providing patient care and life safety, literally someone's life is on the line. In terms of looking at that, like this notion of a e-medical record, right? So an EHR system has been put in place, but what we're finding is that, it's not just around patient care. It's also around patient and guest experience that's driving a lot of the capabilities that we see in healthcare. And that's manifesting itself in this notion of that network becoming so critical from the standpoint of really knowing what's happening on every square foot to provide experiences like wayfinding in a hospital. We have healthcare systems that, when we think about patient experience, are tying bedside controls into PoE shades, roller shades that are inside the room, right? And you think about, it's based on biology. Like, we need natural daylight. That's what we expect as human beings, and providing that level of control in there. Workstation on wheels that are wheeled around the hospital, right? They usually have an embedded battery below, but they're plugging them into the network now for charging them. And because we're now at 90 watts of energy on the network side. We look at also, there's other technologies out there that we see some folks deploying, whether it's UVC or high intensity narrow spectrum lighting, in terms of thinking about infection control inside those spaces. So we built a medical examiner's office that has all that capability in it. And all of these components are really individual elements that are now coming together to provide also this notion of platform for healthcare. Not only, again, around the patient care, but also the patient experience, the guest experience for the folks that are coming in. And it's really this notion of pulling these disparate components together, providing those capabilities, because everyone has wireless, everyone has a network, super critical, right? You think about MRI imaging, prescription robots that are literally dishing out prescriptions inside of hospitals. Like, that's all connected to the infrastructure. And now we're moving all these other elements on top of it for, whether it's a wellness standpoint experience, as I mentioned before. It's super exciting times in terms of healthcare, in terms of what's occurring.
Are there any other industries where you can see it accelerating, or are there any other industries where we feel like it should be accelerating, but it maybe isn't so much just yet?
I think the pandemic really was this notion of folks that were, when we think about what the impact of the pandemic, it really reset every single industry that's out there. Right. And when you look at this, looking at that, where you see opportunities in healthcare, we obviously talked about before, commercial office space, higher ed, and this notion of education and how that's changing, right? A lot of online programs, but what's the capabilities of mixing together online plus physical presence, and having every student not feel like they're being left out, and having the professor, feel like they're connected to everyone inside of that teaching modality. So we see that in education, higher ed. We see it in K through 12 around safety and security inside of schools, energy, all these components, digital energy resilience we see popping up in education as well. It's really every single vertical that is, it's been changed, right? And the forcing function with the pandemic, but now this notion of, what do you need out of space? depending on the industry, a lot of industries, some industries are saying, hey, I want people back in the office 5 days a week. I would say most organizations are somewhere in the distributed work hybrid land, right? For example, I think 2 days, 3 days a week, so square footage doesn't need to be the max. And that's really what I see impacting. What I think that is lagging is this notion of landlords investing into this fundamental technology platform approach versus thinking about just amenitizing spaces. If I create great restaurants and meeting locations, et cetera, that's great. But at the end of the day, the customers and your tenants want something more out of the space. Like, for example, we want a radiometer on the top of every single building that we're in because we want the best shading decisions be made down in the floors that we occupy. That could be a service that's offered, right? And this notion of that technology fabric, I think, is super critical that landlords need to accelerate the adoption of.
Do you think there's any more that should be done sort of during the design and construction phase in terms of this occupant, post-occupant sort of feeling and how do you see that possibly contributing? Or is it being done already? Yeah, what are your thoughts?
And that's a great question because folks ask us the success that we've had and why was the location I'm sitting in so successful? Why does it work so well? When you think about the design process in the way you design and build space, technology was typically never at the table at the inception of a project. Technology was brought in after the fact, and the questions, IT, and hey, we build the technology, and this is how we used to run. It was IT was last in the sort of the design process, and the question was, hey, you have 3 weeks because I need to know where your wireless access points are going to go. I need to know what kind of ports and where you need them in the location, and what kind of screen are you going to hang on the wall. We said, we can't do that anymore. We have to fundamentally think about bringing not technology first, but technology forward. And so the way we design all of our spaces, and this was the first location that we designed that, was the notion of what's the end user experience first inside of any space. The next decision we make is actually the technology. So depending on what you want your end users and think they need inside that space, you should pick your technology then at that point in time. The third decision we made was furniture, orientation, and shape of table. So for example, the table I'm sitting at right now is actually a trapezoid. It's 5-degree angles inside because we're thinking about the physical notion of having everyone have a face for the virtual counterparts. The last thing we did was draw the walls. And so what we also found was this notion of data. And if you think about the industry in terms of the CSI spec, where you have Division 25, Division 27, you have all these separate divisions in terms of individual consultants that had their expertise that was then pushed inside of a project. And if a customer wanted something integrated at the end of a project, we would say, hey, we're just going to hire a master systems integrator. We're going to hire an MSI to be able to bolt all those technology components together to have a great seamless end user experience. That was great for a time being, but that's how you generate those snowflakes. That's this notion of snowflakes, because every single site is different. And so what we also found on the design side was this notion of data. And so how do you really think about data up front in terms of like based on use cases and outcomes? And where are you going to get the data from? Not thinking about, hey, I want to sense occupancy, so I need to put sensors in there. Rather take a step back and say like, okay, I know I'm going to have an IT stack for sure. What do I have from a data perspective with an IT stack? And so part of what we think our role is too, is we've developed some CEUs, continuing education units, courses for the A&D world to really start understanding this notion of data. How do you really think about all these components up front? And then how do you think about that through the life cycle of design? And so if we look at across the board of the success that we've had as a company bringing this to other locations, our limiting factor is really design side. And so how do we really think about this notion of technology forward, think about data, really think about what's possible and not saying I've always done it this way, so this is the way we should do it. And so that aspect of impacting all the other design consultants below a project, so whether it's on the AV side, whether it's on the low voltage, even the MEP side, if you're going to move things to low voltage, like there's an impact there. It was really that changing and thinking about that notion of technology forward, that was super critical for us to find success. And it was very unnatural for those consultants to really, one, understand, and two, really enact that from the standpoint of, working with us to achieve the goals that we want to achieve. And with that, we're accelerating, we're going faster. This project created about 16 or 17 Revit models for us. They're all public, that people and our customers use. We actually built tools to help the industry really think through this notion of physical and virtual coming together. And now we're using AI to do a lot of even conceptual design, looking at test fits and all these other components, right? Because we have all the data sets that, in terms of how we operate as an organization, which can then really help us in our.
Yeah, so I think you mentioned, obviously, COVID was sort of one catalyst for helping drive this forward. Now, obviously, we have AI, and you touched on it a bit there, but how do you see AI impacting this or catapulting it? And where do you see it going in the next 5-10 years?
Wow, it's amazing where the technology is today. And we're just getting started, right, from an industry standpoint. And when you think about this notion of AI today, where it's a lot of, chatbots, if you would, whether you're using, ChatGPT or using Gemini, depending on what large language model that's out there. And it's sort of these spikes, right? Like you do a query and it gives you something back. The world and the technology world is moving to this world of agentic in terms of having agents. Think about us, our digital workers, or an agent for the space that I'm sitting in, the place that I'm sitting in, the operations elements that are going to be a bunch of digital agents. But when you think about design, where we are real time, we've envisioned a new project. We actually used AI to do it, to provide the visuals for us based on the requirements that, the team had for the individual space. And that's today. What we think in the future is that it's really this notion of, you think about that design element, where we are today, but it's all the downstream components in terms of, we can literally now take a floor plate, look at from the standpoint of laying in Wi-Fi technologies on top of that, looking at furniture function and fit, and saying, well, this is the collaboration technology that should be there, camera angles. It's all going to be AI. And so I think what's exciting is this manifestation of, once the AI elements are there for us to be able to do, and, the design piece of it, I think there's all going to be components that are going to spur from there. I've seen some technologies that some of my GC friends are using in terms of looking at AI based on schedule impact, right? It's going to have all these different use cases, but ultimately at the end of it, where we look at this world of agentic AI, where these digital workers, where you and I may have 10 digital workers, the space that you're sitting in and I'm sitting in might have an agent that runs the space, a digital worker. The place will have a digital worker. All these digital workers are going to be communicating real time, right? For us to be able to achieve and operate at scale, which I think is super exciting over the next, 5 to 10 years in terms of where it's going to.
The data, obviously, that you have sort of collected in order to build this sort of replicable model for Cisco's offices. So would you say that you are able to now just go and run this sort of model everywhere easily because you've got the data pain points sort of pinned down? How easy is it to replicate that? And can you see other industries doing the same sort of model?
For sure. And I think once you realize that, once you have the right data set there, then you start collecting it and have that sort of historical construct, now you can start doing all the creative elements with it. And so we first built the location that I'm in. We knew the average meeting size at Cisco was a little bit over 3 people physical and less than 2 people remote. Now we have all the data. I have all the data for every single month, every single day, different types of rooms, because we're counting folks inside of every single room with the collaboration technology that's in there. It's part of just having the devices in there. And so we know how we work. And so then how do you take that, the way we work, and sort of our kit of parts approach from the standpoint of, like, we think about rooms as an example, and move that to a test fit and do rapid iteration from a test fit perspective. I mean, that's where we are today.
About things like digital twins, is that something you guys have experimented with, or are you seeing it with a lot of your clients? Do you think there would be value in helping manage your estates and your buildings in that sense?
We do. So digital twins, obviously the term has been out there for a long time. A bunch of different platforms that are out there. I think that we look at not just a digital twin, but a digital portfolio, right? Digital twins are great from the standpoint of individual asset or individual space, but how do we look at it broader across that portfolio construct?
So,
I do think that part of the manual integrations that have been done to be able to create those digital twins, I think that once a standard like MCP from an AI perspective is going to be adopted, then it's going to rapidly transition to make it easier to be able to get this notion of agentic in place from an AI point of view. That's going to take some of the heavy lift that currently exists today from a digital twin platform standpoint. And that's how I think we're going to get to this notion of digital portfolio and not just think about individual, like I said, asset, individual space, et cetera, right? I can now log in for all the locations that we have around the globe, and I can see how they're all being used. And so we're taking people count and influencing thermal comfort inside the spaces, right? Depending on the mechanical system that's in place. So those capabilities and the what if scenarios as well, I think are going to be super interesting in terms of when the world moves to agentic. But yes, digital twins are important. I think it's just not digital twin, it's digital portfolio we think about. And what's the impact of agentic in terms of really accelerating that notion of digital?
Yeah, excellent. Going back to sort of use cases of this way of working, I think we briefly mentioned Cisco had a project with the Powerhouse Trondheim. I don't know if you could just touch on that and any sort of lessons learned in integrating this technology at scale. Just because coming from Nordic background, our company, it would be good to just hear a project that some of them can relate to as well, our listeners.
That was a great project. And so this notion of moving to a digital fabric that's not only just control by network, but power by network, right? And we think about power over Ethernet. The industry has been moving along, and not a lot of rapid transitions take place in the real estate world, right? It's really sort of iterative approaches. And so that notion of when that structure was put up, it was actually the northernmost energy net positive building in the world. And everything, if you take a look at that structure with the solar capabilities and the design of it, with the hole looking in the middle and for the sun exposure, that was all moved to low voltage. And so that entire space has moved to low voltage from a lighting standpoint, anything they could put on it. And that drove an efficiency factor, because what we find is that a lot of times if you have a constrained resource like energy, then you really pay attention to it. Not just saying, hey, I want to be net positive, but really starting to look at every single little detail, looking at lighting efficacy and lumens per watt that's coming out of your fixtures above your head, and making sure there's, you have a great algorithm to drive shading coefficients inside the space. You really need to think about all of that. And so when that structure was built, it was that for the northernmost net positive building, it moved 100% to low voltage. And so as we move forward here, it's this notion of how do we get more and more efficient in terms of turning off loads when no one's inside the space. If you're on a network, you can do all of that. And I think that's part of the learnings. And when they embark on these projects, is this notion of first go live. And then after that is that the capabilities of the tuning that you have, because at the end of the day, it's all software. There is no hardware left. It's all software. Yes, there's hardware you plug into, but this capability of software, which is why we think about platform, we should be able to rapidly iterate on top of this for decades to come with software. And so that's what we're finding in there. But that's a great building, right? Just phenomenal achievement by the team there in terms of that net positive aspect, in terms of northernmost in the world, and really one of the first that was moved to low voltage, which was exciting.
So we've obviously mentioned a lot of sort of sustainability benefits and also sort of efficiency. How does that, I can imagine though that it's still quite a big shift for some companies, some industries. What sort of ROI benefits can you expect from moving your portfolio to this type of working? Or how do you sort of get people on board with it in the first instance?
It's a great question because, as I mentioned before, as the industry grew up in the notion of these silos, right? Just how the industry developed, right? Before lighting controls even existed, right? Well, lighting controls came on board. It's like, okay, what scope is that going to go in? Then you have AV, and okay, that's the AV scope. And you have physical security, oh, that's physical security scope. And so there's notion of how do you think about all of this on a single platform, single software capability layer, single hardware layer, and think about the data, right? Across all those different silos. And that has been the challenge. And so for a lot of the work that we've done it ourselves. And the number one question that we do get from clients is like, okay, great. How do we do this? And so we developed a viewpoint in terms of partnering with a world-renowned MEP firm that is a viewpoint of how do you think about all the capabilities that you want to deliver, which really go back to those 4 pillars that I talked about before. This notion of mixed presence, frictionless experience in person, sustainability, wellness, and digitizing space. That has to be your construct. And so how do you think through the silo component, where as a technology company, we think if you can design better, faster, more cost effective, build it better, faster, more cost effective, IT operate better, faster, more cost effective. That's the lens that we sort of provide our guidance through. And so some examples of that are, it's like, okay, we know we want to be well certified. That's fantastic. Traditionally, you might say, okay, I want to go put in air quality sensors. Well, we put air quality sensors on our lighting network because lighting became data once you move it to the network. So instead of putting in yet another system, we then added simple sensors on top of it. And so that viewpoint that we've developed stratifies across lighting controls, across shade controls, across even furniture from the standpoint of thinking through this notion of height adjustable desks and charging laptops and monitors that you need the power, moving flexibility. And it's really became a recipe, right? A framework to provide design teams to really look through and say, okay, I get it. Like occupancy shouldn't be an occupancy system, right? Meeting room capabilities in terms of like you think about when you walk into a room, you have a digital display outside. That shouldn't be a separate solution. That should be integrated with the components that are already inside the room to use that camera to trigger red or green, right? All of that, right, really was formulated down to that structure that I talked about that we're happy to share with anyone in terms of this notion of that matrix that stratifies all those design disciplines. And our ultimate goal is when we think about that notion of, yes, we moved to low voltage. There's other great technologies that are out in National Electric Code 2023 called fault managed power. This notion of high voltage DC pulsing, the power of the pulse power in terms is called fault managed power. All of that's coming together. And so for us to be able to provide that viewpoint was super critical for us we're moving faster than we ever have as a company. We see our customers doing it as well that have adopted it. And so, but it's really that viewpoint that's provided to be able to do that better, faster, more cost effective. And we have proven that if you do this, right, you can build for cheaper. So like if you pre-inflationary price in the space I'm sitting in New York here, we built for 10% per square foot cost less than comparable space in the city in New York. But it was that recipe and that viewpoint. And again, we're happy to share that from a matrix standpoint that really stratifies across all different disciplines to make the right decisions that's truly integrated across the board.
Excellent. And what sort of, if you could give one piece of advice to any architects, contractors in helping contribute to the creation of smart buildings, what would that be?
Embrace technology early. And so, technology, yes, can be scary, but it's not, going to change. It's going to actually, rapidly be more technology, but bring technology into the conversation up front. Think about those outcomes that you want to deliver, bring that technology in up front. And there's a value to platform. So a lot of times it's, especially when you get to the build cycle, it's like, okay, I need to value engineer things out. Well, this notion of value engineering components out may impact you in other areas when you think about this integrated platform approach. And so that is also critical, not just think about technology up front, but really think about the integrated matrix capabilities and the downstream. Just because we've always done it this way doesn't mean we should continue to do it that way, right? And that breaking that sort of notion of having to think about the projects the same old way that we always have, and integration at the end and all these other components. We've proven that if you plug in and stay within the recipe, if you would, that I just spoke about, you're going to find success. 90% of it just works out of the box.
Perfect. And just conscious of time. So one final question for you, Bob. So just looking ahead to this year, 2026 and beyond, what trends or technologies do you see shaping the next generation of smart buildings, AI, and connected workplaces? And what do you see the future of workspaces in the next 5 to 10 years looking like?
It's a great question. It's hard to think about 10 years out, right? From a technology standpoint, I think there's three pieces that are really exciting. Fault managed power that I just mentioned before. National Electric Code, any country that follows NEC, 2023, it's Article 726, it's Class 4 energy. The notion of being able to take thousands of watts and put it on a conductor that's 18 gauge and run it 2 kilometers, and to accelerate this DC transition, I think is really super exciting. And we're already deploying it with customers today across, education, commercial office space. I think that's like really the first one. And it's really going to get us to this point of a true notion of a DC microgrid. When you think about like energy being networked, first. Second is that AI is only going to accelerate. And I think that this notion of AI, it is disruptive. It will be disruptive. And so in terms of thinking about how to modernize the firm that you're in or the company that you're in using AI, you can't hide from it. It's going to happen. And I believe that it's going to make, the people on this planet, we're going to be able to multiply our productivity output by, a factor of say 10x, if you would. And it's going to impact everything that you do. It's going to impact the design elements. It's going to impact just everything. So really be open-minded around this notion of AI, because it's, like I said, it's going to accelerate. And the world of Agentic is right around the corner from a technology standpoint. That's the second component from an AI point of view. And then when you think about like the third element in terms of really where we see and where I get most excited about, is really that notion of really bringing that platform approach together. It's here. Like it's something that the industry and individual companies have been building towards. But taking that mindset view of platform, I think is just going to be standard over the next, decade. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to look back, I think, in a decade and say like, well, yeah, IT did that before. Why didn't we do that? And I think that's where we're going to be in terms of the industry and thinking about the smart building capabilities that we're delivering and the experience capabilities and sustainability and wellness. I think it's just a super exciting time when you combine all of that together to achieve, goals that we didn't think were possible when we look back.
Excellent. And I think, I really like what you've mentioned about, the wellness aspects of it. I think if we're just thinking of the people in the buildings from the beginning and embracing that technology earlier on, it's only going to help to, create this new world.
100%.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been really insightful. Just finally, is there anything, anywhere that we might be able to see where you're up to, Bob, or any sort of events we can catch you at, or any future talks?
Going can always on LinkedIn, but also if you check out all the Cisco Lives that we have going around the world, we have EMEA coming up, and then we have Cisco Live US. We're always announcing new technologies, but also capabilities that I think are just really impactful and exciting for especially the built environment. Always super active at those events.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Great to talk to you, and we'll catch up soon.
Thank you. I appreciate the time today. This is fantastic.
Thank you, Bob.